Pam, Galvanize is all about incredible women doing incredible things, and we love celebrating those women, such as yourself. But we recognize that we can't do it alone, and we need some really great men. And we understand that the Women's Coaching Alliance was inspired by a really great man.
It was, yeah. I was inspired by my late husband, Doug, he was an amazing guy and he loved coaching. So when our daughters got old enough to play sports, he was the first one to raise his hand and get out there because he knew the impact that a really good coach would have on a kid.
Why was it important for you to get to honor him in that way by starting the Women's Coaching Alliance to give women the opportunity to have that impact on young athletes?
So it's a couple things. I mean, he really worked at getting more women into coaching with him every season. And every season he would come up short. And he often asked this question, where are all the women coaches? And I think had he lived longer, he probably would have been more successful at it. When he passed away, there was this interest in how do we do something that really keeps his legacy alive.
It's a tough space to be trying to navigate because there were no women coaches, because there were no women coaches for women to see and aspire to emulate. So how did you gain traction in a space where there were no role models to have a beacon to look towards?
You know, I was really fortunate because there were a couple of women in our community who were out there coaching, but they were definitely the exception. And they talked about some of the things that they had found as they tried to get more women into coaching, one of which was most moms have plates that are already too full. So to try to ask a lot of moms to come into coaching was probably not going to be very successful. They helped me think about where are the other pockets of women that we could target to get into coaching. And so I would talk to everybody I could find. I joked that I was like the little bird in Are You My Mother? I would say, what makes a great coach? What makes a great coach? And the things people would tell me were how I would have responded if you asked me, what makes a great leader? So that was sort of a light bulb moment to say, oh, wow, great coaching is great leadership. And then as we talked to a group of young women who were in high school, all athletes, and asked them about the opportunity to coach younger kids, they were really interested in it. And then I said, well, what would get in the way? And they were all these very nice and polite young women, and they looked at each other and sort of said, are you going to say it or am I going to say it? And finally, one young woman said, dealing with the difficult parents. And I thought, that's a bit of a deal breaker. I don't know what you do about that because parents are a reality in youth sports, and some are great and some are less great. And then what I realized was the skills needed to navigate difficult parent conversations are the same skills we'll want young women to develop to deal with difficult bosses and direct reports and vendors and partners and so on. So if we could front load those skills for these young women before they head out into the work world, how much more powerful will they be? And so that's really how the idea all came to be.
I love in speaking about young athletes too, in the same way that these women are learning transferable life skills, not just coaching skills. They're going to be imparting on these athletes so many skills that are sports related, but then also can be brought into their everyday life because they're the coach that gets to have that impact like your husband did.
Absolutely. My husband worked with this gentleman, Denny, and they both coached their kids' sports. So Denny shared this story with me after Doug passed away. Doug said to Denny, how did your team do at the end of the season? And Denny said, I don't know. I'll let you know in 30 years. The point being, right, we don't ever know the near-term impact that we have on these kids. It really shows up years later and who they become and how they feel about themselves. And, you know, one of the things I'm really proud of is that our coaches coach girls and boys. It's not just girls because we do think it's important that boys see women as leaders too. It's not just girls seeing that role model. That's super important. But we had this, fourth grade boy who complained to his mom that he had girl coaches for his flag football team. And 45 minutes into his first practice, he runs to the sidelines and says to his mom, I only have a quick water break, but it's okay because my coaches are really good. That's how we change perceptions, right? Is we don't talk about it. We show the impact that these young women have and these kids feel it. And that's the stuff that makes the difference.
It's so hopeful to hear you talking about it in this way, but I think we'd be remiss not to mention it is still a tough time for women in the world, not just women in sports, not just women in business. Are there any frustrations that you are facing or anything that you are particularly concerned with as you continue to grow?
The situation in the world for women, young and old, is worrisome. And we see it on the sidelines. We see the dads, not all of them, I should be really clear, it's the exceptions, but some of the dads who see young women coaching on the sidelines and just assume they don't know enough and come in and try to take over and push these folks aside or coach their own kids instead of letting these young women coach on their own. And I do think it's a situation where the more of us who stick together and rise up and say, we need to have a voice. The best organizations happen when we have a diversity of thought and perspective, and that means diversity of all types. So I think, organizations like Galvanize, lifting women up and standing together and saying, we will not accept, and this is what we stand for, and we are going to create change. It's not going to be quick or easy, but we are going to change it because it's the right thing to do for all of us. I really think that's what it comes down to.
I feel like we're almost partners in that way, Galvanize and the Women's Coaching Alliance, the uplifting women, but it's doing so much more than that for everybody else that's a part of that movement upwards.
Absolutely. In our case, we're about developing these future female leaders using coaching as a way that we do that. But in the process, we get more coaches out there, so more kids get to play. We get to change what the sidelines look like so they're more reflective of the community itself. We allow parents to see coaches in a very different light. Our coaches all have mentors. I love to see that our young women are developing these leadership skills that we believe will translate into any leadership experience. And when they carry that into what their career holds next, I think it's just super exciting to see how that will play out.
When we were looking at your resume, we were so surprised at your original background and where you've ended up. And it's all making sense now with your diversity of thought and how all of this intersects. But was there any part of it that was scary, or did you always know that these were always going to align to where you are now?
I would be lying if I said I knew. Candidly, when I left healthcare and then I was working in this new organization that I had put together and things were going along well, COVID happened, Doug passed away, and I went back to work shortly after he died because my mom died a few weeks before he did. Doug passed away, my kids were home from school, and so my whole world had just been turned upside down. And so I went back to the thing that felt the most familiar, which was work. And then a few months in, I realized I was not doing anyone a service. And so I decided I would take 3 months and I would step away. And in 3 months, I would come back and say, is this still really where I want to put my energies and focus? And if not, then I would let the rest of the group move forward with what we had built and I would do something else. And 3 months later, I woke up and I was like, this is no longer it, which then was clarifying, but it was so incredibly scary because when I walked away from that, I walked away from my identity, the career that I had built. I was no longer a wife. I had no more parents. All of the things that we hang on who we are and how we define ourselves were gone. And this idea of how do we get more women into coaching, that was completely unfamiliar to me because I was neither an athlete nor a coach. So it was all terribly scary, and I had all of the imposter syndrome thoughts every step of the way. And what I learned to do, I had a great coach because I said to her, I don't know who I am anymore. And I can remember just bursting into tears when I said that. And she said, what is the one thing you do know? And that's what kind of propelled me forward, is I don't have to know the whole plan. I don't have to know where it's going to go. I just have to take the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. And then I was really fortunate to have great people around me who supported, gave ideas, helped out every step of the way.
I hope you know how impactfully that's going to land on the Galvanize audience, because you've touched on so many things that all of us are struggling with, dealing with, navigating through. So thank you very much for that.
As grown-ups, we do a disservice when we describe our career trajectory in a way that feels really linear, because most of us don't feel that way, and it can look like it is from the outside. and having twin 18-year-olds, I know they're thinking about careers and what do I do and how did you get to that space? And when we pretty it up and make it all look logical without all the missteps, the side steps, I think it really does a disservice.
We could keep you here all evening talking about the vulnerability and how much there's so much more growth in the vulnerability than just the perfection. But before we let you go, your husband was a huge sports fan. What do you think he would think about you sitting here at the Super Bowl having this phenomenal conversation with us about uplifting women in coaching?
He would be incredibly proud. We were here at the Super Bowl 10 years ago together, and it was his absolute pinnacle moment. So he was a tight end. We grew up in New Jersey. He was a Giants fan. I was a Giants fan. He was a huge football fan, and it would be a source of immense pride.